Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Phillips. I'm a solution architect here at Epic. So I'm a mix between technical support, technical sales, making sure that customers on the architecture side can use Epic tools like Unreal Engine, Twinmotion, Reality Capture, and all the other fun things we do. But today I'm just talking about Twinmotion mostly and how it applies to everything across the AECO ecosystem. So there's familiar faces in this room from multiple areas of it. But I'm curious, is anyone here not in AECO? Okay, that's fine, that's good. I caught just a couple. And then does everyone here mostly know Twinmotion and how it works? And are there any people who are a little beginner? Okay, so a couple of beginners, good. We're gonna cover a lot of scattered things here. The agenda is deceptively simple. I'm just gonna go through the AECO, which is, really roughly chronological order of the life cycle of a AECO project. And throughout, we're going to cover a lot of different use cases, some tips and tricks, features you probably use and probably don't know about here and there. So for my goals, I hope I can remind you of some features that have been there for a long time that have been forgotten or not promoted in 5 years. Educate you on new features that we have that are a little more exciting, and ideally can inspire you on some of your future projects. And maybe you can use Twinmotion on more things that you hadn't thought about or use it more wisely. So across the 4 main industry segments we're covering, I'm going to make some really broad generalizations. I'm going to oversimplify your job roles, so I apologize for that. But when it comes to how AECO works with 3D software, there's like a 90% overlap. So all of you can use all of these tools that we're going to talk about. We're going to start with A for architecture. So roughly speaking, this is the design of buildings. Because it's part of the initial design phase, there's kind of a broad spectrum of visual targets. So maybe it's so early in the design that you want a more stylized, non-photoreal look so that you're not distracting people with the wrong things. Or maybe you need it to look really amazing because you're trying to sell the dream and win the project. So we have Datasmith plugins for just about every major CAD software like Revit, Rhino, SketchUp. Like this is our old friend, the sample project from Revit. And Twinmotion has a great relationship with these guys. So in Twinmotion, when you go to import a file, not only do you get BIM files through the geometry tab, but in that direct link tab, it'll actually see Revit, and you can establish a link there. So this is the direct link streaming in that Revit model to Twinmotion really quickly, which is really great if you're going to be using your DCC software side by side with Twinmotion and making constant changes and pushing those updates. Once it's inside Twinmotion, whether it's the file import or the direct link, you can always send your Twinmotion project somewhere else. Like you can give it to external people or internal people, and they don't have to have access to your Revit work. Once you're inside Twinmotion, we have a huge library, like I think tens of thousands of assets from things that we've 3D modeled just for AEC projects. There's animated characters in there. There's direct access to the Quixel assets, including a ton of 3D plants that technically aren't in that foliage category. And then there's Sketchfab assets too, so that's over 700,000 community-made models that are free to use for commercial use. And it's all inside this content browser. You don't have to go to Fab, you don't have to download stuff, purchase things at all, actually, for inside Twinmotion. There's these really simple path tools to add some life, some animation to the scene. So with just a couple clicks, you can have pedestrians walking down the sidewalk. There's a few different categories of what outfits they're going to wear, like Middle Eastern outfits, travel, beach. Then you got the same tool for bicycle lanes, filling it up with people riding their bikes. So you can make it really fast people or really slow bicyclists. And the same thing for vehicles as well. So in literally 3 clicks, we can have a lane, a road full of moving vehicles with 1 lane or up to, I haven't tried past 4 lanes on each side, but you can go pretty far with that. And similarly, the ambiance system is super easy to use inside Twinmotion. So trees are smart assets that can grow and change with the different seasons. Time of day is just a really quick slider, and it's geographically accurate if you set your location. Volumetric clouds are a pretty cool new feature. So these are true 3D clouds that can move and transform, and you get lots of parameters to change and animate inside of your content. And then we have like seasonality and weather too. So you can make it snow if you want, you can make it rain, and all the different materials react appropriately. And then for true seasonality, the trees are also going to react like this, and deciduous trees are going to change leaf colors and drop their foliage and grow it back in the springtime. And you can hook all that up to have every camera angle with a different season or have videos that animate between any of these parameters. There's a couple of useful tools. There's a measurement tool built into Twinmotion. There's actually a new one called Measure Tool 2. And you can click 2 points and get a really quick measurement to verify your road's the right size, your doorway's the right size. There's also a checkbox called constraint. So this will shoot the measurement ray out from the surface. That's really handy for like measuring the interior of a room and seeing how far across the walls are without trying to go and click and get the right spot perfectly. On the rendering side, Twinmotion looks pretty good by default, but you can enable this clay render. So this will be your stylized layer. You can just replace all the materials in the scene with a solid color. And you get some options for excluding things like foliage and characters, vehicles. Unfortunately, at this moment, I don't think there's a way to exclude exactly your imported model. So if you needed to do that, you would just be assigning or making a configuration just for the material replacement on everything else. So all of that adds up to like, what feels like a living, breathing view of your architectural projects that you can update as the designs get updated and really quickly create different renders and different scenes. On the camera side, lesser known than the regular camera is our orthographic features. So this is not found under the camera tab of the ambience. It's actually in the top right corner of the viewport. There's a little eye icon. And when you go to the 3D house icon, that controls top down, left, right orthographic projection. And the thing on the bottom right is actually a custom angle. So you can move that orthographic camera wherever you want and clip through the scene, get these perfectly straight lines, which looks really, really cool. And it works with all the animated features and everything else. It also works really well with our section cube. So this is a feature in Twinmotion where you can just drag out a box and cut through any walls and any geometry. So here you can like slice away the exterior wall and then use one of those orthographic cameras to get a really cool elevation floor plan. And it all works really well with the path tracer too, so you can really push the quality or enable one of our other like stylized outline effects. There are a lot of export options for Twinmotion, and you can do them all at once if you want to. So of course there are still renders, video animations that are really simple to create, 360 panoramas, which if you've ever tried to make those in Unreal Engine, it's like way easier than Unreal. This stuff is so smooth. And then you can also export your whole Twinmotion file as a presenter executable. So this would be like someone downloading your file without the editable capabilities and having all the animations there to walk around and look at from every single angle. And that works with like a mouse and keyboard setup or virtual reality as well. And for the executable and the 360 panoramas, we also offer, for people who pay for their Twinmotion seats, the cloud presenter and cloud panorama sets. So you can actually just send somebody a URL and they can access your project really, really fast without you sending a multi-gig file and hoping they have the right hardware for that. I wanted to show you the VR mode inside of Twinmotion. So if you prefer to look at your projects in that spatial situation and navigate them like that, it's like a 3-click operation to do that from Twinmotion. I want to take the opportunity, though, to point out quality and performance options here. I think by default, we leave VR quality at like ultra. But if your scene is only running at 45 frames per second in Twinmotion, it is not going to run at 45 frames per second in VR, and it's going to be a really not great experience for your end users. So make sure you go into your preferences, and in the quality tab, there's a second VR tab where you can change quality levels. So I recommend going to medium and potentially even low, because Twinmotion focuses on like great lighting, lots of dynamic objects, dynamic shadows. Those things are really impactful to VR, so you should be just expecting to turn off some of those features to have a really smooth, comfortable experience. And on the content side, object count is going to be a big one. So either removing objects or using the new modeling tool to merge objects together. And turning off lights and turning off dynamic shadows if you can afford it. Moving on to the engineering category. For engineers, there tends to be a little bit more external data, like maybe you're running different analyses in other software and making sure the building is going to actually structurally stay in one piece. There's also the chance for these to be bigger scale projects because if you're developing a huge interstate freeway, then that falls under engineering. And related to that, this also means that if you're going to be affecting people's commutes or affecting environmental areas, then you need to be able to communicate your projects from this engineering standpoint too. So this scene is a really basic office interior, but perhaps there are some engineers who are working on things behind the walls. So this was a chance for me to remind you guys that we have this cool X-ray mode. It's actually built into every material in Twinmotion, and it's just a little checkbox to turn on. And anything that has that mode is rendered on top of the rest of the scene. So you could have different colors. You could have blue and red objects for like hot and cold, air or water, or electrical things could be yellow. And it's a good showcase for the configurator tool as well, because maybe you don't want it to look like that at all times. So configurations are a new media type that you can create, and you can choose from different types. This one would be a properties configurator. And best practice, of course, is to always name your configurations and name your configuration states. So this is like the default no X-ray mode for the scene. And then I just go to the material of my MEP work, and I turn on X-ray, go back to that media configurator, and just make a new state. And I name it, X-ray on. And now Twinmotion has this little button for me that I can click on to toggle X-ray on and off for all these MEP meshes. And you can mix and match lots of configuration states, and you can make it that 2D widget or add a custom icon to it. So it's a really clever way to introduce more interactivity and more ways to present your content. On the large project side, I wanted to come up with an example here. So this is a terrain that I actually imported into Unreal and exported. And it was made using the Synterra Fab plugin. So it's a free resource to access real terrain data. And I draped over some USGS imagery on top to make it a little higher resolution. So Twinmotion benefits from the same technology that Unreal provides under the hood. So you have the large world coordinates, you have double precision, so you can handle really physically large worlds. There's a slight limitation on the camera speed, kind of reaches a max. So if you need to jump a mile down the road, then you probably want to have a little object in the scene graph that you can click on and hit the F key to jump over there. And of course, we'd love the road to be filled with cars. So I did, here I'm dragging out the little spline to put cars along the couple miles worth of road. And it does work, but I want to be transparent that once you end up with hundreds or thousands of Twinmotion vehicles, your scene tends to slow down a bit because every car is looking for the ground surface and every car is steering its wheels. It tends to be a little bit complex for that scale and high frame rate. So if that's okay enough, then you can just turn off the cars if and when you need them, or just deal with a lower count of cars. And if you really want a lot of traffic data in Twinmotion, I have an idea that I'm going to present later at the end of the section. Another kind of data that I think people forget about in Twinmotion is point clouds. So I wanted to do an example of this. There's a tool from the USGS called the LiDAR Explorer. And it has I don't know how many terabytes of data, but the entire country of the United States basically has this aerial LiDAR imagery that is up for grabs to the public. So I downloaded one of these sections, and the slide is not broken. It really is black when I look at it in Cloud Compare. You can see the little lake in the top left corner, though. But inside the list of scalar fields, like all the data channels of the LiDAR point cloud, is this other one called number of returns. So this would be when the LiDAR point bounces around the world and then returns up to the sensor, that gets recorded. And it's a cool way to find foliage or edges of buildings. So you could modify the LiDAR data and project satellite imagery on top of it in something like Cloud Compare. But I thought this was a good enough example. And this is that data set just directly inside of Twinmotion. I split it up into a couple pieces, 3 pieces, but it's still 1.5 by 3 kilometers wide, 63 million points. And it's a pretty cool way to just fly around this 3D LiDAR data in real time. We give you the option to replace the color with a solid color of your choosing. You won't be able to do any other complex management of the point clouds like you would in software dedicated to that. But if you have your color data baked into that first main channel of the point cloud, then it looks really cool in Twinmotion. I wanted to explore kind of an alternative version of this geographic data set because this is actually in my neighborhood. So if we hide the point cloud here, I have a mesh that I downloaded from CCM Ion. So CCM normally streams into Unreal, but you can download a GLTF of their terrain from the website. And I draped over that USGS data again for higher res satellite imagery. And if we fly closer into the canyon, you actually see my house pop up. So this is another point cloud. It's 43 million points, but a much finer resolution and detail than that previous data set. So I walked around my property with Matterport Pro 3 to do this scan, and my backyard is just a ton of weeds, which is why it doesn't really look like anything there. And there are errors in the data set, but it was good enough for this. There's no roof on my interior scan, so I'm turning off the shadows right here to show you guys. But you can fly around the house. It's a lot of points, a lot of data, and yeah, you can see a ghost of me in the living room accidentally getting in the way of the scanner. But I want to use Twinmotion to design a better backyard. So I have this design I'm trying to come up with. If I could ever afford it, I want to build a deck out here off to the left. And so I have a 3D model of this deck that I can mix and match, combine with my point cloud, but it kind of conflicts. So there's some point cloud bushes that are going to be removed in the future, hopefully. So that's where that section cube comes in. And by default, it deletes anything in its bounds. So that includes all geometry and all point clouds. But you can tell it to only affect either point clouds or geometry. So here in half a second, I'll show you the results. So now I have a deck, and the point cloud is gone. Nothing's conflicting. So really cool way to combine data. You can see the section cube trimming out the point cloud. Again, Twinmotion is not point cloud software where you're going to be editing and deleting individual points, re-exporting it, but to actually view it and work with it in context is great. Point cloud support, we support most of the major file formats, E57, LAZ, LAS, a few others. Fun fact, these are actually externally referenced files. So we do the hard work of streaming the data in as we fly around the scene, and that way you don't have to always crash Twinmotion with crazy data sets. And sometimes it affects points will pop in and out, or things that are behind you will stop casting shadows, but it's still really cool and easy to use. There's one more example I wanted to show with this scene, which is a Twinmotion built-in feature, another checkbox to have an ocean plane. So this would be like a pseudo simulation of flood zone or ocean levels rising, but here it's interacting with my mesh terrain. But if we turn off the mesh terrain, we can also have it interact more with the point cloud. There's a couple of ways you could kind of recreate this easily on the water piece of this, but just having such an easy way to have your point cloud data be shown off and tell stories like this is really, really powerful. I have a slide for extra credit because I didn't have the time or skill to do these things, but one topic is CFD analysis. You're not going to do your CFD analysis inside of Twinmotion, but I think there is an opportunity to at least present your findings here. So a lot of those tools will spit out like a plane with your CFD data, or like a video texture that you could bring into Unreal Engine and use it as part of your presentation. And similarly, you probably have some volumetric data that could be baked out into a point cloud, and you can bring that into Twinmotion to interact with it. And then back to that road topic from earlier, many of you use VizSim to actually simulate real traffic conditions and get that real data of where vehicles are and how fast they're going. I think there's an opportunity, an untested opportunity, to try to script out something that converts that into an animated GLTF file of mesh instances that you bring into Twinmotion. And if you keep your eyes peeled, that'll make more sense later after another example. So for construction, scheduling matters a lot. You're going to be working on a building now for 5+ years. You got to make sure it's on time, on budget. Got to make sure people know what's going to happen at different phases of construction. There's also the safety aspect, which is usually #1 at every firm. Every worker needs to be trained and to follow the rules, follow the law. And construction can also be dirty and noisy, and you're going to be blocking off roads. So you want to be able to communicate that with internal, external stakeholders, and even the general public. So this is just one image of really quick Twinmotion scene I put together using standard library assets. Like you can show people, hey, this is what the road closure is going to look like. You could put them into virtual reality and have them walk around and make sure pedestrians have the right access to the building still. that part of Twinmotion is a given for sure. So back to my deck. Don't look too closely at the design of it because I think you'll have some critiques, but I wanted to animate this and do some construction phasing to maybe show my wife like what it's going to look like when it's only halfway complete during the summer picnic. But in Twinmotion, there's a feature just for phasing animations. It's called the phasing group. It gives you this little calendar timeline where you can keyframe visibility of objects. So you could turn off everything by default and then slide the calendar down to a specific day, turn on a section, slide the calendar, turn on a section. Really easy to use tool to kind of build up your scene. You can even incorporate construction vehicles off to the side and other things that are changing along this. And at the end, you get this scrubbable animation of the different phases that you can incorporate into individual media renders, like videos that actually show the animation coming in and out. But it's a little limited in that it's just visibility keyframes. It doesn't get too detailed and too fancy. So for my deck that I want to animate, if we jump, I want things to fall in from the sky. I want things to be animated and really sexy. I want the deck top to like roll out from the side. I want to get a little fancier than Twinmotion allows. So I only recently learned from my colleague Simon and Blakeney that you can actually export animated sequences from Unreal Engine to Twinmotion. And so this is the only part of the presentation where I'm going to go like really technical, but you also don't have to use Unreal for this if you don't want to. So the first step is definitely always making sure your projects are organized. I don't have like real 4D scheduling for this make-believe deck, but I have different folders that I'm going to organize into the different phases of construction. And for every phase of construction, I have an actor in the scene that is an editor utility actor. So this actor contains a lot of parameters. It has a list of all the objects that I want to be animated as part of the phase. And it has a transform offset, so if I want things to drop from the sky, there's a relative Z transform. If I want them to rotate in, there's a relative rotation. And then I have a wait period and an animation duration so that maybe the whole phase of objects comes in at once, or maybe it staggers into a really fancy effect. And if you can't read that, don't worry, it might not even work if you copy-pasted it. But I just wanted to summarize my method for procedurally animating this in Unreal. If you've ever done sequencer animation in Unreal, hopefully you found it somewhat simple. You have your sequence, you drag your mesh into the sequence, you click the keyframe on the transform track, and that's your animation. If you want to script it out, it actually gets a little bit more complex, which I learned the hard way, so I just wanted to clue you in if you wanted to do this yourself. First, you get the reference to the level sequence. Then you add a possessable for every object that you're going to animate. And then you add a track to the possessable, which would be a 3D scene transform track. And you would think you would just add the keyframe directly to the track, but actually need to add a section to the track. And then in that section, there are multiple channels of transforms. So you need to select like location.z channel and apply the keyframe. And then you're good to go. So it was a lot more work, but it really pays off at scale. This is what it ends up looking like when I just batch create those keyframes. So every object here has a little offset with just a couple transform keyframes, and they can all slide into place and drop around, which is pretty cool. To get that animation out of Unreal, the best method is to bring your level sequence into the world as an actor, select that actor and any referenced meshes that it animated, and do a file export selected. You can also just right-click on the level sequence in the content browser to export it, but right now that will also export like everything in the level, even if it wasn't referenced. So this is the best method. And to get things from Unreal Engine to Twinmotion, my favorite format right now is GLB. So that's a GLTF binary format. It's a single file, it's lightweight, it embeds all the textures, it has support for the level sequences and a few other things. Unfortunately, the one downside is that it will bake your textures, but for like a CAD model, it doesn't matter. You're going to replace it all in Unreal Engine anyways. In Twinmotion, instead of importing that GLB as geometry, which you could for static stuff, you're going to import it as an animation, and it will read all those tracks and all those keyframes. We support transform tracks for moving meshes around. We support skeletal animation, so you can have fully rigged, deformable characters. Those can also be imported now. We do not support visibility tracks. So if you want something to appear out of thin air and drop down, you have to set the scale to 0, which sounds really scary, but it works just fine. And then we don't support any of the other sequencer tracks, like, you're not going to be able to have blueprint functions and material parameters and camera cuts. Those stuff are not going to be understood by Twinmotion. So this is the final deck animation. The structural beams fall into place, and then we can lay out every joist and every joist hanger one after the other in a more procedural fashion. So we can get really fancy with Twinmotion these days. This data set is pretty lightweight. It's just a few primitive objects instanced a handful of times. But I know that real data sets are not always that clean. So I wanted to do a little bit more of a stress test with the Revit model that I have. And what happens with these Revit models is all of these structural beams are just tossed into the seam graphs, tossed into the outliner. There's not really a clever organization to it. So I also added to this system a spline component. And every object here is going to measure its distance to the spline. And that way you can kind of direct the motion of the animation. It can kind of do more storytelling and more art direction with that same thing. So the colors here are just the, how far along in the animation it will be. So this is that model in Twinmotion animated. This is actually 4,900 unique assets in Unreal Engine because of the way that Revit imports structural elements, and a total of 17,000 mesh instances. So I have to be honest, this is kind of like the threshold of pain that I reached. The lighter weight version of this model ran at 60 frames per second as long as it wasn't animating. This version of the model ran at 30 frames per second when it wasn't animating. But as it's animating 17,000 tracks, it was slowing down a little bit. So if I had to continue this project or upgrade it later, for every phase of construction, I'd swap out an animation with a static version of that geometry. But overall, it's really compelling example for me. And I know if you're feeling a little critical, you'd say, well, this is just random animation. I have real 4D scheduling. I have really sophisticated needs for this. All I'm proving here is that you can bake out keyframes. So any data you have that's in a CSV, a data table, database, a fancy plugin, if you can make it a keyframe, you can bring it into Twinmotion with this method. Next topic is safety training. I think everyone's got to do it if you're working on a construction site. If you need to update old materials, then maybe you'll find situations where photography is impractical or expensive. And doing it in 3D gives you another benefit of it being a little bit more interactive and engaging, hopefully. So using that same BIM model that we had before, I wanted to put together a construction safety scenario. So in Twinmotion, I'm just like throwing together primitives, assigning library objects and materials. You can do world projected textures, so you don't have to UV anything and worry about that. The Sketchfab library came in handy for this. Here I'm making a decal for a spray painted sign on the ground. This whole entire scene took me, I think, 45 minutes to create. And then as we move into actually organizing it and putting it, making it functional, it was another 45 minutes. These are like Quixel assets of just raw lumber, basically, and I'm constructing a fence and instancing it around the structure. And along the way, I made a handful of hazards that are in the scene. So I'm going to have a correct or an incorrect version of every hazard that's dangerous, and then I'm going to have an alternative version in the scene of the corrected hazard. So to do what I want to do, I'm going to be using the configuration mode, configuration settings inside Twinmotion. And I'm going to hide and unhide certain folders. Folder organization is super critical. If you have that 10,000 objects of your BIM data in there, you don't want to be hunting and pecking for things too often. So making sure you have containers and subcontainers and naming everything really cleanly is going to help you a lot here. So here for every hazard that I created, there's a big name for that hazard. And in that is a subcontainer for the incorrect version and a subcontainer for the correct version. And there's a trigger. And I made sure to keep it really organized like that to help me. And this is how the configuration looks and works. There's actually a box, several boxes around the scene that have a transparent material. So it's not actually visible to the camera. But with the configuration setting, it is a 3D trigger. And it's going to switch visibility of like this puddle that shouldn't be there. So we can click on the puddle, clean it up, and get a little thumbs up. Great job, you found the construction hazard there. So you can play along silently or out loud and see if you find any other hazards around the scene. Let's see, this guy's just doing his job. This rebar is sticking out. It's a big impale hazard, so we've got to make sure it has the caps on. So we click on them and they get their caps. Again, the water, not good for rust, electrical, mold, definitely need to clean that up. This corner doesn't look too sketchy, but that railing sure does. You don't want to fall off the sides. We've got to repair the fence. And that random cable on the ground, that's, I don't know, it's a trip hazard. There's no good reason for that to be there, so we click on that one. And this gentleman has a hard hat on, but because there's heavy equipment around, we probably need some better high-vis shirts on. And then the guy on the ladder, of course, there's too many things wrong there. He's more than 6 feet off the ground. He needs the fall arrest. He's on the top 2 rungs of the ladder. We'll just get him off of that for now and figure it out later. The scariest thing to me is the hole in the ground, so we'll barricade that and make sure nobody falls in. So now, like, this configuration features unlock the ability to almost gamify Twinmotion and build it into an interactive experience, which is really cool. That's a little confetti Easter egg if you caught that. So the ability to like have triggers and reactions and have triggers spawn other triggers. You can kind of build a game in an hour and send that to somebody as a presentation file or a cloud presenter. If you don't care about interactivity, that's fine. Just use it as a photography replacement. So this is 4K path traced renders, really standard, easy stuff you guys are hopefully used to. And you can also do 360 renders. So I've seen some examples out there of web-based applications that do kind of the same thing I just experimented with, but they want to build their own web UI layers on top of it, their own interactive elements, mask out images, overlay other images. So there's plenty of ways to do that when you start with Twinmotion. Sorry. On the operations side, this is our last major category. I would talk about, so this is for people who own a building, are trying to sell parts of the building, or trying to maintain a building. I would talk about digital twins, but there's not that many direct relevant features in Twinmotion unless you consider digital twins to be something like the BIM model with all the different layers that you can expose and look at. So I'm going to focus mostly on marketing and sales for this. Twinmotion, of course, it was born out of archviz. It's meant for rendering buildings and making them pretty. So you can use it for all the standard imagery to try to sell a luxury condo. This is the Twinmotion panorama set that's hosted in the cloud. So it's basically a Matterport tour that you can walk around, but in a property that doesn't exist yet. And this interface where you can click and drag and you get the little jump spots that you can move around, we build this for you. So you set your camera locations, you publish it, and you get a URL. And this is all done for you, which is really, really cool. It can also be embedded into a website just using an iframe, so it can be part of a much broader set of sales tools in that way. And of course, the configurator is a natural fit for upgrading luxury finishes and really getting the best bang for your buck on selling properties. Twinmotion is a really simple tool to set up this kind of thing and make it look good. It's simple enough that it's not going to reach into your database or your CRM. It's not going to know what finishes are available, or your customers are not going to purchase things through Twinmotion. So I just want to be clear about that this is going to be more of a supporting tool for a sales center and some associate to use this, or send a link to somebody to get them excited about the options that they can discuss later. But it's definitely a really compelling example, and you can make those thumbnails really, really easily. This is a small example of switching out the meshes, like electric stovetop versus gas range. And then the final major feature I wanted to talk about in Twinmotion that people don't fully understand is high resolution, large format renders. So there's an emerging market of robotic avatars that need homes. So if you wanted to create some printed brochures and send that out to the community, you can. So what resolution do you think this image is? Maybe it's an 8K image, 16K image. On the screen and on the YouTube recording, it's going to be 1080, which is fine. But behind the scenes, it's actually 61,440 pixels wide by 61,440 pixels tall, which is really high res. And I recently learned that that's not much, that's almost at the limit where the JPEG format doesn't actually support more pixels than that. So for those that care, it's 3,700 megapixels. The PNG output is 3 gigabytes, more than 3 gigabytes. The reason you might want to do that, though, is if you zoom in really close to the finger of this avatar and look at the reflection in their finger glove, you can actually see the person who took the photo in the first place. But the reflection's not that amazing, but so we could go to the corner of the room and inspect something like a small electrical outlet. So I think that's pretty high resolution. You can do a lot with that. This is enabled by the tiled rendering in Twinmotion. So when you select a really high-res render, there has just another checkbox, tiled rendering. So Twinmotion behind the scenes, without you thinking about it, split up this render into 1,700 unique renders that it goes through. So you don't need a terabyte of GPU memory in order to handle it. You can just let it do most of the work. So if you wanted to print that out at full resolution, like 300 dpi, that would be 17 feet wide or 5.2 meters. So in this fake scenario of it being a photo backdrop, that's really overkill because the nicest family photo that you have, the nicest professional digital print that you have is going to be 300 dpi, and you don't need that at 17 feet. So if you make it a lower resolution to 72 dpi, then that would be 70 feet or 21 meters. Definitely billboard territory. But even that, the bigger something is, the farther away it is, the less resolution you really need. So it's also good enough resolution at 30 dpi to be 170 feet tall or 52 meters tall, which is still generous when you're covering an entire building with a decal. So I think you could easily double that or halve the resolution, but I just needed to communicate somehow just how high resolution that is. And what was shocking is at 64K, it only took me, granted it was a lightweight scene, but it only took me 45 minutes for the render to complete, which is really mind-blowing. Before we wrap up, I wanted to thank all the Sketchfab artists that I use their work in these example scenes. It's so easy to get that work. There's a little export tool to give credit to the people who contributed to your scene. It's such a cool feature. Twinmotion lets you really put together scenes really, really quickly. And so I'm thankful for people who make their models available for download. So yeah, I hope coming out of this, you learned a couple features. You have some more ideas of where it could fit into your company, your workflow. Maybe now you think you can do different projects with Twinmotion. So I really appreciate you guys coming to the session today.